The FAA's Back to Basics program has selected 12 major subjects to address over a 3-year period. While these topics are taught to all pilots during their initial training, accident reports indicate that these primary areas continue to show up as causes for aircraft accidents. The Back to Basics program will re-examine these subjects. The object is simple: to reduce the number of accidents and to save lives. The subject of this slideshow is the mid-air collision problem. The information is factual and is intended to be thought-provoking. And regardless of your level of experience, we believe that the suggestions and techniques in this presentation can be easily applied to your flying and will contribute to a safer aviation environment. In 1978, the chilling pictures of a PSA Boeing 727 going down in flames over San Diego, California, shocked the nation. While on approach to Lindbergh Field, the plane collided with a Cessna 172. 144 people died. The probable cause, in part, failure of the 727 flight crew to maintain visual separation from the Cessna. The Cessna in the foreground of this picture is similar to the one which collided with the Convair 580 in the background. The first officer on the Convair and the occupants of the Cessna died in this mid-air collision. If you look closely, you can see the Cessna's landing gear protruding from the right side of the Convair. The probable cause, in part, failure of the pilots to exercise adequate vigilance to detect and avoid each other. More recently, a Falcon 50 business jet collided with a Piper Archer over Teterboro, New Jersey. The debris from the two planes fell into a heavily populated area, resulting in serious injuries and extensive damage on the ground. In each of these accidents, the basic collision avoidance techniques should have been routinely applied. They are the concepts of see and be seen and see and avoid. And yet, in each instance, the aircraft collided with tragic results. Mid-airs averaged 2 per month, year in and year out. During 1984 and 1985, collisions resulted in 85 deaths. And while most collisions are between fixed-wing aircraft, gliders, helicopters, and even balloons have been involved in mid-airs. The following graphs might provide some insights into mid-air collisions. For example, as this chart clearly shows, there's a mid-air collision season, which normally begins in April and lasts until late October. While no pilot is immune from the possibility of a mid-air, this chart seems to indicate that experience is a significant factor. Note that 49% of all mid-airs involve pilots with less than 1,000 flying hours. Your ability to detect other aircraft is seriously limited when you depend on peripheral vision alone. This chart clearly shows that at 10 degrees of peripheral vision, your visual acuity is only 2100, and you cannot identify another plane until it is just half a nautical mile from you. 70% of all mid-airs occur below 3,000 feet and within 5 miles of an airport. It's also significant that there are 4 times as many mid-air collisions below 1,000 than between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. Probably 2 of the most intriguing facts about mid-air collisions are shown here. How can the vast majority of accidents occur during daylight hours and in clear weather? Perhaps you've heard a military pilot say, "Check your 6." This translates to look out for what is behind you. As this graph shows, half of all mid-airs happen when one aircraft is overtaking another. And it doesn't matter if the plane is climbing and overtaking or descending and overtaking. Obviously, a pilot must be very aware of traffic both in front of him as well as behind. It doesn't seem that there is much difference between high-wing or low-wing aircraft as far as mid-air potential is concerned. The differential between the two types may reflect the numbers of those aircraft in operation. There is evidence that rotor-type aircraft do make a difference. But this low number may also be a result of the relatively low number of helicopters. Using the preceding information, we can now begin to draw specific conclusions about mid-air collisions. The potential for a mid-air is greatest as a pilot departs from or arrives at an airport, when the airplane is under 3,000 feet. is operating in good weather conditions and is flying in minimally controlled airspace, such as a control zone. The conclusion is that mid-airs happen when the pilot's workload has increased and when he is concentrating on other things. Uncontrolled airports are particularly hazardous. Even though you look for other aircraft and monitor your radio, it's dangerous to assume that there are no other aircraft nearby. And here's why. The chances for a mid-air collision increase as you approach the traffic pattern. 2% occur on the downwind leg of your approach, 18% on the base leg, and 80% on final. That's right. 80% of the mid-airs happen on final approach, when the pilot's attention may be focused on other things, such as managing airspeed and adjusting the approach to the runway. When do most mid-air accidents occur? The odds point to summertime, but the mid-air season runs from April through October, and it will usually happen between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m., daylight hours. Let's profile the most likely pilot of a collision. He or she is probably relatively inexperienced, between 20 and 40 years of age, flying a general aviation aircraft, and has not filed a flight plan. The pilot probably has not mastered good scanning techniques. He or she could be a student pilot practicing, but statistics show that experienced pilots who are transitioning to new aircraft are also a high risk. Finally, the chances are high that the mid-air will happen to the pilot who is not flying under the air traffic control system. Collisions most often happen when the pilot is concentrating in the cockpit, when he is distracted, when he's overtaking another aircraft, when he is skirting controlled airspace, or during instruction. In other words, mid-airs are most likely when the pilot's mind is focused elsewhere, so that he is set up not to see. But even if you are looking for traffic, sometimes it is difficult to find. Case in point, camouflaged military aircraft. How many F-4s are there in this picture? If you count 3, you're wrong. There are 5 camouflaged phantoms hiding in this scene. Even a slow airplane, or one turning onto final, can blend into the background. The following series of slides depicts an actual event. A Gates Learjet Model 35 approaching from the north, and an amateur-built Challenger 2 approaching from the west, collided at the intersection of these two runways. The airplanes were less than 20 feet above the ground. Neither pilot had seen the other, and the result was fatal. Of particular concern is the area adjacent to controlled airspace, such as a restricted area, an ARSA, or a TCA. ATC can help an aircraft under its control, but ATC needs to know where you are. Therefore, it's not only a good practice, but it's now a federal regulation that if you have a radar transponder, it must be turned on. And if the transponder is equipped with Mode C capability, it must also be turned on. As indicated earlier, instructional flights are of particular concern. Both the instructor and the student are focusing their attention on a single phase of training. Each thinks the other is maintaining a good lookout, when in fact, neither is. Regardless of the type of aircraft being flown, the cockpit can take all of a pilot's attention. Good scanning procedures are vital, no matter how complex the cockpit is. How can mid-air collisions be avoided then? Well, stressing the following points can significantly reduce the number of such accidents. Extra alertness must be stressed in such high-risk areas as controlled airspace, around airports, and also during altitude changes. Also, keep a proper lookout. Even ask passengers to help scan for traffic. Keep your head out of the cockpit. Don't let the controls completely dominate your time. Many pilots have the misconception that operating on an IFR flight plan reduces or even eliminates the need to see and avoid. Don't get caught in this complacency trap. And most importantly, use ATC facilities whenever possible. Let's return to the complacency trap for a moment. ATC might not be aware of a VFR aircraft along your intended route. So even if you are flying on an IFR flight plan, you still have the responsibility to see and avoid. When flying below 10,000 feet during approaches and departures, professional air carrier flight crews are required to limit all conversations to the task at hand, namely, flying the airplane. Now that's a good practice for any pilot, as well as limiting all other distractions when operating in areas of increased risk. So far we've discussed scanning and looking for other aircraft. Operation Lights On is a good way to be seen. Anti-collision or other appropriate exterior lights should be on whenever the engine is running. Landing lights should be on when operating within 10 miles of any airport. And of course, this should be done both at night and during daylight hours. This is equally important in reduced visibility and under special VFR conditions. But again, remember, pilots must develop good scanning habits and learn to keep their heads out of the cockpit. Complacency is to be avoided at all times, and pilots should learn and follow all local and system-wide procedures. By the way, if you don't understand ATC instructions or clearances, ask for clarification. And then do what ATC says. There is a reason you got those instructions or clearances in the first place. Extra precautions are needed when you're not on a flight plan, during altitude changes, or when you're near controlled airspace and airports. Good pilot procedures include looking around, checking your blind spots, using your radio, filing a flight plan and requesting ATC service whenever possible. Remember, it's essential that you broadcast your position and intentions at uncontrolled airports. As mentioned earlier, 70% of all mid-air collisions occur within 5 miles of an airport, and 62% of these are at uncontrolled airports. Collision avoidance starts on the ground. Never taxi out for takeoff at an uncontrolled airport without first checking all 360 degrees around you. And remember to announce your intentions on the radio. Here's an example of how easy it is to miss seeing an airplane. Even with its landing light on, this Cessna is not much to see on a relatively clear day. Consider how much less visible it would be in reduced visibility. You might not see it until it's too late. The National Transportation Safety Board has made some specific recommendations regarding airports, terminal control areas, and charts as they relate to the mid-air collision problem. Some of the recommendations apply directly to pilots, and others point to areas which would help pilots. NTSB recommends re-evaluation of existing closed traffic pattern procedures, particularly at airports where ATC towers are not in continuous operation. At uncontrolled airports, traffic separation procedures for both high and low performance aircraft should be established, published, and widely disseminated. NTSB also recommends that pilots always be clear, concise, and accurate when making aircraft position reports, whether en route or at a terminal area. Mode C transponders should be in working order and should be turned on at all times during flight. When on VFR, radio contact should be maintained with the appropriate ATC facility. NTSB recommends that well-traveled helicopter routes should not be adjacent to other control areas, nor should they be immediately under control area shelves without a buffer zone. While NTSB has asked the FAA to critically review airports and terminal control areas, pilots should not hesitate to point out problems or to make recommendations to airport managers for their study and review. After all, input by you, the user, is vital to safe airport operation. Regarding charts, NTSB also recommends changes in 3 areas. First, that terminal charts should be standardized and simplified to reduce clutter. Second, that terminal data should be improved. And also that charts should provide contact frequencies of ATC facilities to VFR pilots. But no matter how many recommendations are made, The fact remains that it is you, the pilot, who is in the only position to create or avoid a mid-air collision. In summary, here are some key things to remember. Position ambiguity can develop quickly, particularly around uncontrolled airports. When abbreviations are not precise or colloquialisms are used for local geographic points, you're setting yourself up for a potential mid-air. Always enter traffic patterns on a 45-degree angle to the downwind leg and at the established traffic pattern altitude. Again, this is especially important at uncontrolled airports. The risk of a collision during flight instruction cannot be ignored. Approximately 52% of all mid-air collisions involve aircraft whose pilots are undergoing instruction. Therefore, flight instructors must develop and use foolproof scanning procedures during instruction. And finally, after all is said and done, the best anti-collision device you have is your eye. We hope that you'll pass along the information in this presentation to other pilots who could not attend this meeting. Thank you for attending this Back to Basics session. This slide presentation was produced by the United States Department of Transportation and the Federal Aviation Administration in cooperation with the National Transportation Safety Board. Technical assistance was provided by the FAA Office of Aviation Safety, the FAA Office of Public Affairs, and the FAA Office of Aviation Standards. A special thanks to Mr. R.J. Jones, Western Pacific Region Accident Prevention Specialist, Oakland Flight Standards District Office, for his contributions to this production.